my rifle scope, but nothing had prepared me for what emerged from that bombed-out church at 0347 hours on June 15th, 1999. My name is Marcus Chen, and I was a Marine sniper during the Kosovo conflict. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. Hell, if someone had told me this story before that night, I'd have recommended they seek psychiatric help. But know what I saw. I know what spoke to me without words. And I know why I can never sleep through the night anymore. The thing is, what happened on that rooftop changed everything I thought I knew about war, about reality, about why we're really here. And if you think Kosovo was just another Balkan conflict, you're wrong. Dead wrong. Because what I witnessed suggests that every war, every conflict, every drop of blood spilled on this planet has been observed by something ancient, something patient, something that's been waiting for humanity to evolve beyond its need for violence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with how I ended up on that rooftop in the first place. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen. That's me, third-generation military, raised on discipline and the belief that every problem had a tactical solution. My grandfather fought in the Pacific Theater, my father in Vietnam, and I followed the family tradition into the Marines. Sniper school, force recon, the whole 9 yards. I was the guy they called when they needed someone eliminated from 1,000 yards away, no questions asked. Kosovo was supposed to be peacekeeping. NATO forces maintaining stability after the Yugoslav withdrawal. Simple reconnaissance, overwatch for humanitarian convoys, maybe some counter-sniper work if the situation deteriorated. I was assigned to an observation post on the 5th floor of a partially destroyed apartment building in Pristina's old quarter. Perfect vantage point, multiple escape routes, and abandoned enough that I could maintain position for days without civilian interference. The building itself was a monument to the conflict's brutality. Artillery had torn through the upper floors, leaving jagged concrete and twisted rebar exposed to the elements. The residents had fled months earlier, leaving behind family photos, children's toys, and the accumulated debris of lives interrupted by war. I'd seen it all before in other conflicts, but something about this place felt different. Heavier, like the violence had soaked into the very stones. My equipment was state-of-the-art for 1999, M24 sniper weapon system, night vision, thermal imaging, encrypted communications. Enough MREs and water for a week-long deployment. My mission parameters were clear: observe and report. Engage only if NATO forces or civilians were in immediate danger. The first 3 days were routine. I watched the city slowly come back to life, documented the movement of military vehicles and potential combatants, and filed regular reports with my command post. Children played in the rubble-strewn streets during the day. Merchants reopened their shops, and families began the long process of rebuilding their lives. But on the 4th night, the city went completely silent in a way I'd never experienced before. It started around 2,300 hours. One moment, Pristina was humming with its usual nighttime activity. Distant generators, the occasional vehicle, dogs barking, the normal sounds of a city trying to heal. Then, as if someone had thrown a switch, everything stopped. I mean everything. The silence was so complete, it was almost physical, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. Even my own breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. I adjusted my night vision equipment, scanning the streets below for any sign of movement or explanation for the sudden change. That's when I first noticed the dogs. Every stray dog in the city, and Pristina was full of them after the conflict, had stopped barking and started moving. Not running, not panicking, just walking, all in the same direction, toward the old church district where the heaviest fighting had occurred. Through my thermal imaging, I could see them streaming through the streets like a slow-motion flood, dozens of animals moving with purpose towards something I couldn't see. I keyed my radio to report the anomaly, but all I got was static. My communications equipment was down, and my backup radio was producing the same electronic whisper. That's when the lights started going out. Not all at once, but in a pattern. Building by building, street by street, working outward from the church district like a wave of darkness consuming the city. But these weren't power outages. I could see the electrical lines were still intact, and my thermal imaging showed the buildings were still generating heat. The lights were just turning off. I checked my equipment, tested my scope, verified my night vision. Everything was functioning normally. Yet the feeling of wrongness was growing stronger with each passing minute, like static electricity building before a thunderstorm. And then I saw the first figure. It emerged from the ruins of St. Dimitri's Orthodox Church, the same church where over 60 civilians had been killed during the worst of the ethnic cleansing. At first, I thought it was a survivor, maybe someone who'd been hiding in the ruins. But as I focused my scope on the figure, I realized this wasn't human. Not even close. The being was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs that seemed to bend and flow like liquid mercury. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and seemed to emit a faint phosphorescence that my night vision amplified into an eerie green glow. But it was the way it moved that made my blood run cold. It didn't walk. It glided across the broken concrete and debris as if gravity was optional, its elongated form swaying with a grace that seemed almost choreographed. As I watched, frozen by a mixture of fascination and primal terror, more figures began emerging from the church ruins. 3, then 5, then a dozen of them, all moving with the same impossible fluidity. They formed a loose circle around the church, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested either telepathic communication or a hive mind. Through my scope, I could see their faces, if you could call them faces. Large, dark eyes dominated their features, pupils so dilated they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their heads were elongated, almost egg-shaped, with no visible nose or mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over alien bone structure. And those eyes seemed to be looking directly at me. I felt my heart rate spike, but my training kicked in. I stayed perfectly still, controlling my breathing, maintaining my position. These weren't enemy combatants, but they were unknown contacts in a hostile environment. My finger moved to the trigger of my rifle, but something held me back. There was no aggression in their posture, no threat in their movements. If anything, they seemed almost reverent, like they were conducting some kind of ceremony or ritual. That's when I noticed the air around them was shimmering. The atmosphere surrounding the beings seemed to ripple and bend, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But this was different. The distortion was too regular, too controlled. It pulsed in rhythm with their movements, expanding and contracting like the breathing of some vast, invisible organism. Through my thermal imaging, I could see that the temperature around them was fluctuating wildly. One moment they'd appear as cold spots against the ambient heat of the city. The next they'd blaze white-hot, then fade back to normal. It was as if they existed in multiple temperature states simultaneously. But the most unsettling part was what happened to the electronics in the area. As the beings moved through the city, every piece of electronic equipment in their vicinity began to malfunction. Streetlights flickered and died. Car alarms triggered randomly, and the few remaining operational cell phone towers went dark one by one. I felt a chill of recognition. My communications equipment had failed when they first appeared. My night vision was starting to show interference patterns, and my rifle's electronic scope was displaying error messages I'd never seen before. Whatever these things were, they were affecting technology in ways that defied explanation. And they were moving with clear purpose through the city, stopping at specific locations that seemed to hold significance. I watched them visit the elementary school, where 32 children had been killed. The marketplace where a mortar round had torn through a crowd of civilians. The apartment building where an entire family had been executed. At each location, they would form their circle, their forms swaying in that same hypnotic rhythm. And at each location, something happened that I still can't fully explain. The beings weren't just visiting these sites of violence. They were doing something to them. As they formed their circles and began their synchronized swaying, I could see through my scope that the very air around these locations began to change. The debris didn't move, the buildings didn't repair themselves, but something fundamental shifted. The oppressive weight of tragedy that had hung over these places seemed to lift, replaced by something that I can only describe as peace. It was like watching emotional weather patterns change, grief and anger evaporating like morning mist. But I wasn't just observing this process, I was feeling it. Waves of emotion began washing over me, but not my own emotions. These were the feelings of the people who had died in these places, the terror and pain of their final moments, but also something else. Forgiveness, understanding, a profound sense of compassion that seemed to flow from the beings themselves. I began to understand that these entities weren't just alien visitors. They were engaged in some kind of healing process, working to cleanse the psychic wounds left by violence and trauma. They were literally absorbing the negative energy that had accumulated in these places, transforming it into something else. But why? And more importantly, why were they doing this here, in this particular city, during this particular conflict? The answer came when one of the beings separated from the group and began moving directly toward my position. I watched through my scope as the being glided through the empty streets, moving with that same impossible grace. It didn't seem to be walking so much as flowing, its form shifting and adapting to the terrain in ways that suggested it wasn't entirely physical. My training screamed at me to take the shot. Unknown contact, potentially hostile, approaching my position. But something deeper, some instinct I didn't fully understand, told me to wait. To watch, to see what it wanted. The being reached the base of my building and paused. Through my thermal imaging, I could see it looking up at my position, its large dark eyes seeming to stare directly through the concrete and steel to where I crouched with my rifle. Then it began to climb, not up the external fire escape, not through the blown-out windows, but up the face of the building itself. Its elongated fingers seemed to find purchase on smooth concrete, and it moved vertically with the same fluid grace it had displayed on the ground. In less than a minute, it reached the roof level and began moving toward the access door. I repositioned myself, keeping my rifle trained on the door, my finger on the trigger. Whatever this thing was, it was about to get very close, very fast. I keyed my radio again, trying to reach my command post, but got only static. The door opened, not with the creak of rusted hinges or the groan of warped metal, but silently, as if the building itself was welcoming the entity inside. I could hear its approach now. Not footsteps, but a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate through the concrete structure. It appeared in the doorway to the roof, and for the first time, I saw it clearly without the distortion of my electronic equipment. The being stood in the doorway, its 7-foot frame barely fitting through the opening. Up close, its alien nature was even more pronounced. Its skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, showing a faint network of what might have been veins or energy channels beneath the surface. Its elongated limbs moved with a grace that suggested boneless flexibility, and its large dark eyes seemed to contain depths that extended far beyond the physical. But it was the sense of presence that hit me hardest. This wasn't just an alien creature. It was an intelligence of vast scope and profound wisdom. I could feel its attention focused on me like a searchlight, examining not just my physical form, but something deeper. My thoughts, my emotions, my very essence. I kept my rifle trained on its center mass, but I found myself unable to pull the trigger. There was no sense of threat emanating from the being, no aggression or hostility. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced before, unconditional compassion. The being moved closer, its form seeming to ripple and shift in the dim light. As it approached, I began to feel a strange sensation in my mind. Not intrusion, but invitation. Like a door opening in my consciousness, offering access to something vast and incomprehensible. And then it spoke. Not with words, not with sound, but directly into my mind. The communication was instantaneous and complete, bypassing language entirely and speaking to something deeper than conscious thought. Marcus Chen, third-generation warrior, carrier of ancestral trauma, seeker of purpose. The words, if you could call them words, formed in my mind with perfect clarity. But along with them came a flood of images and emotions that nearly overwhelmed my consciousness. I saw myself as the being saw me, not just a soldier with a rifle, but a complex pattern of energy and intention shaped by generations of violence and service. I saw my grandfather's experiences in World War II, my father's trauma from Vietnam, and my own struggles with the moral complexity of warfare. All of it was visible to this entity, all of it understood and accepted without judgment. To carry forward, more images flooded my mind. I saw the being's purpose with startling clarity. They were not invaders or conquerors, but healers working to address the psychic wounds left by human conflict. They had been present at every major war in human history, not as participants, but as witnesses and cleaners, working to prevent the accumulation of negative energy from poisoning the planet's spiritual ecosystem. But there was more, much more. The being showed me visions that stretched across centuries, across continents, across the entire span of human history. I saw its kind present at Gettysburg, at Verdun, at Hiroshima, at countless other sites of mass violence and trauma. They had been there, working in the shadows, cleaning up the spiritual debris left by human conflict. But they weren't just passive observers. They were active participants in humanity's evolutionary process, working to guide the species toward a future where such conflicts would no longer be necessary. They were gardeners of consciousness, patiently nurturing the growth of wisdom and compassion in a species that seemed determined to destroy itself. Your species stands at a crossroads, the being communicated. The capacity for destruction has grown beyond your wisdom to control it. Without intervention, without evolution, the cycle will continue until nothing remains. I saw potential futures: nuclear war, environmental collapse, the breakdown of civilization itself. But I also saw other possibilities: humanity transcending its violent nature, developing new forms of consciousness and cooperation, joining a larger community of evolved species. The choice remains yours, but the time for choosing grows short. The images shifted, showing me the present moment from a cosmic perspective. I saw the beings' network spanning the globe, their representatives present at every site of current conflict. They were working to heal the wounds of war, while simultaneously trying to prevent new ones from forming. You have been chosen to remember this encounter, to carry the knowledge forward, to help your species choose wisely. But why me? Why is Sniper a professional killer, someone whose entire career had been built on the precise application of violence? The answer came with a flood of understanding that nearly brought me to my knees. Because you understand the true cost of violence. Because you've seen death up close and know its weight. Because you carry the warrior's burden of necessary evil and dream of a world where such necessity no longer exists. The being showed me scenes from my own past, the targets I'd eliminated, the lives I'd taken in service to my country and my mission. But I saw them now from a different perspective, not as enemies to be destroyed, but as fellow humans caught in the same cycle of violence and retribution that had plagued the species for millennia. Each death had left its mark, not just on me, but on the spiritual fabric of reality itself. The beings worked to heal these wounds, to transform the negative energy of violence into something that could serve the greater good. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed human allies, individuals who understood both the necessity and the tragedy of war. You are not just a witness. You are a bridge between worlds, between the old pattern and the new possibility. I saw my future role with startling clarity, not as a soldier, but as a teacher and healer. Someone who could help other warriors understand the true nature of their service and the possibility of transcending it. Someone who could help humanity evolve beyond its need for violence. But first, I had to understand the full scope of what I was witnessing. The being opened my perception to show me the vast network of its kind operating across the planet. They were present at every site of human conflict, not just current wars, but the accumulated trauma of centuries. They worked in teams, in coordinated patterns, healing the psychic wounds left by violence, while simultaneously working to prevent new conflicts from escalating. But their work was becoming more difficult. The pace of human violence was accelerating, and the weapons were becoming more destructive. The beings were struggling to keep up with the spiritual cleanup required, and more importantly, they were running out of time to guide humanity toward a more peaceful path. Your species is approaching a threshold. The next few decades will determine whether humanity evolves or destroys itself. We cannot force this evolution, but we can provide guidance to those ready to receive it. I saw the network's operation in Kosovo specifically. The beings had been drawn to the Balkans because of the intense concentration of historical trauma in the region. Centuries of conflict had left psychic wounds that were preventing the area from healing naturally. The recent ethnic cleansing had only added to the accumulated damage. This region is a test case. If healing can occur here, in a place so wounded by history, it can occur anywhere. Your presence here is not coincidental. The being showed me how I had been subtly guided to this specific position at this specific time to witness their work. My deployment orders, my assignment to this particular building, even my decision to maintain this observation post, all of it had been influenced by factors I hadn't recognized at the time. But there was more. The being had a specific mission for me, a role I was uniquely qualified to fill. You must remember everything. Every detail of this encounter must be preserved and shared at the appropriate time. But not yet. Your species is not ready for open contact. The revelation must come gradually, through individuals who can prepare others for the truth. The being showed me a network of human contacts, individuals around the world who had been chosen for similar encounters. Soldiers, aid workers, journalists, civilians, all of them had been given pieces of a larger puzzle. Together, they formed a human network that paralleled the being's own organization. You will find others like yourself. You will recognize them by the mark this encounter leaves on your consciousness. Together, you will prepare the way for what must come. I saw myself in the future, no longer a soldier, but a teacher and counselor. I saw the work I would do with other veterans, helping them process their experiences and understand their deeper purpose. I saw the gradual revelation of truth, the slow preparation of humanity for the next stage of its evolution. But I also saw the resistance I would face, the skepticism, the ridicule, the institutional pressure to suppress what I had learned. The being's knowledge came with a price, the isolation of carrying truth that others weren't ready to accept. The burden is heavy, but it is necessary. Your species' future depends on individuals willing to carry this knowledge forward, despite the personal cost. The being began to withdraw, its form becoming less solid, more translucent. But before it disappeared entirely, it left me with one final revelation. What you have witnessed here is only the beginning. The events in Kosovo are part of a larger pattern, a test of humanity's ability to choose peace over violence. The outcome will influence our approach to your species' future. I saw potential timelines branching out from this moment. In some, humanity continued its violent path, and the beings gradually withdrew their protection and guidance. In others, humanity began to evolve, and the beings revealed themselves openly, offering direct assistance in the transition to a more peaceful civilization. The choice is not yet final, but the window for decision is closing. Watch for the signs. Prepare others when you can. Remember that every act of violence perpetuates the cycle, while every act of compassion moves your species closer to transcendence. The choice is not yet final, but the window for decision is closing. Watch for the signs. Prepare others when you can. Remember that every act of violence perpetuates the cycle, while every act of compassion moves your species closer to transcendence. The being's form faded completely, leaving me alone on the rooftop. But the experience wasn't over. As I sat there, trying to process what had happened, I began to notice changes in myself. My night vision equipment was functioning normally again, but I no longer needed it. I could see clearly in the darkness, not just the physical environment, but the emotional and spiritual energies that flowed through the city. The sites where the beings had performed their healing work glowed with a soft, peaceful light. The areas still wounded by violence pulsed with darker energy. I understood that I had been changed by the encounter, that my perception had been permanently altered. I was no longer just a soldier with a rifle. I was a witness to something far greater than any human conflict. But what was I supposed to do with this knowledge? The rest of my deployment passed in a blur of routine activities and profound internal transformation. I continued to perform my duties as a sniper, maintaining my observation post and filing regular reports. But everything had changed. I could see the patterns now, the way violence begot violence, the way trauma accumulated in physical locations, the way individual acts of hatred contributed to larger cycles of conflict. But I could also see the potential for healing, the possibility of breaking these cycles through conscious choice and deliberate action. The beings didn't appear again, at least not in the same dramatic fashion. But I sensed their presence, their ongoing work in the shadows. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of them in my peripheral vision, always at sites of recent violence, always working to heal the wounds left by human conflict. When my deployment ended and I returned to the United States, I faced a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could file a report about what I had witnessed, knowing it would likely result in psychological evaluation and career termination. Or I could keep the experience to myself, carrying it as a private burden while trying to understand what I was supposed to do with the knowledge I had gained. I chose silence, at least officially, but I began to seek out others who might have had similar experiences, and I started to find them. They were everywhere once I knew how to look. Veterans with haunted eyes who spoke in careful euphemisms about unusual contacts during their deployments. Aid workers who had witnessed phenomena that defied explanation in war zones around the world. Journalists who had covered conflicts and seen things that didn't make it into their reports. We found each other through careful questioning, through shared understanding of experiences that couldn't be easily explained. We formed an informal network, a support group for people who had been touched by something beyond conventional reality. Each of us had been changed by our encounters, but in different ways. Some had developed enhanced perception, others had gained healing abilities, and still others had become bridges between different communities and cultures. But we all shared the same burden, the knowledge that humanity was being observed and guided by intelligences far beyond our understanding. We also shared the same mission, to prepare others for the truth, to help humanity evolve beyond its need for violence, and to serve as a bridge between the old world and the new possibilities that the beings represented. But the work was dangerous. Those who spoke too openly about their experiences faced ridicule, career destruction, and sometimes worse. The truth had to be revealed gradually, through careful preparation and gradual awakening. Years passed, and I transitioned from active military service to civilian life. I used my GI Bill to study psychology and conflict resolution, preparing myself for the work I had been shown in my vision on that rooftop. I began working with veterans suffering from PTSD, helping them process their experiences and understand their deeper purpose. I never spoke directly about the beings or my encounter in Kosovo. Instead, I focused on the human elements, the spiritual cost of violence, the possibility of healing from trauma, the potential for warriors to become healers. But those who were ready to hear understood the deeper message. The network grew, slowly but steadily. We developed careful protocols for identifying and supporting new contacts, for sharing information without attracting unwanted attention, and for preparing humanity for the eventual revelation of the being's presence. But we also watched as global conflicts continued to escalate, as new forms of violence emerged, and as the spiritual wounds of war accumulated faster than they could be healed. The being's warning about humanity's approaching threshold seemed increasingly relevant as world events unfolded. The beings had told me to watch for signs, and they were becoming impossible to ignore. The accelerating pace of technological change, the increasing polarization of societies, the emergence of new forms of warfare, all of it pointed to a civilization approaching a critical juncture. But there were positive signs as well. The growing interest in meditation and spiritual practices, the increasing awareness of consciousness research, the emergence of new forms of cooperation and communication that transcended traditional boundaries. Humanity was beginning to evolve, slowly but perceptibly. My role in this process was becoming clearer. I was not just a witness to the being's work, but an active participant in humanity's transformation. Every veteran I counseled, every person I helped heal from trauma, every individual I guided toward a deeper understanding of their purpose, all of it was part of the larger mission. But the work was far from complete. The being's network was vast and patient, but humanity's window for conscious evolution was closing. The next few decades would determine whether the species would transcend its violent nature or destroy itself in the process. As I write this account, decades after that night on the rooftop in Kosovo, I can see the future converging on the present moment. The signs the beings warned me about are manifesting with increasing frequency and intensity. Humanity is approaching its threshold, and the choice is becoming unavoidable. The beings are still here, still working to heal the wounds of war, while guiding humanity toward a more peaceful path. Their network has grown, and more humans are awakening to their presence and their mission. But the outcome is far from certain. What I witnessed on that rooftop wasn't just an encounter with alien intelligence. It was a glimpse of humanity's potential future. The beings showed me two possible paths, one leading to destruction and extinction, the other to transcendence and joining the larger community of evolved species. The choice is still ours to make, but the time for making it is running out. This account is my contribution to the revelation process, my attempt to prepare others for the truth that is coming. But it is not the end of the story, it is barely the beginning. The beings are still here, still working, still waiting for humanity to choose its path. Their presence in Kosovo was just one operation in a vast network of healing and guidance that spans the globe. What I witnessed was significant, but it was also routine for them, part of their ongoing mission to help humanity evolve beyond its need for violence. If you've read this far, if something in this account resonates with your own experiences or intuitions, then you may be one of the chosen. You may be part of the network that is preparing humanity for its next evolutionary step. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to look. The unusual phenomena at sites of conflict, the increasing reports of anomalous contacts, the growing awareness of consciousness beyond the individual mind, all of it points to the same conclusion. We are not alone, and we are being guided toward a future that will either transcend our violent past or be destroyed by it. The choice is still ahead of us, but the time for making it is almost here. What I saw from that rooftop in Kosovo was just the beginning. The real story is still being written, and you, if you're ready, might be part of writing it. The beings are still here. They're still watching. They're still waiting. And they're still choosing new witnesses to carry the message forward. Are you ready to see what they have to show you? Marcus Chen completed his military service in 2003 and now works as a trauma counselor specializing in combat veterans. He has never spoken publicly about his experiences in Kosovo, but close associates report that he sometimes speaks of unusual contacts during his deployment. This account was found among his personal papers and is being shared with his permission. Several other veterans have come forward with similar experiences, but their accounts remain classified. The network continues to grow. The mission continues to evolve. The choice remains ahead of us. Watch for the signs. Prepare others when you can. Remember that every act of violence perpetuates the cycle, while every act of compassion moves our species closer to transcendence. The beings are still here. They're still working. They're still waiting. And they're still choosing new witnesses to carry the message forward.